As John
Thank
got
you.
it. I got it.
Good for you.
Yes. Okay. As John said, tonight we're exploring further into the Mahayana. The first teachings that I attended with Trungpa Rinpoche were actually Mahayana teachings, a summer course at Naropa Institute. And I understood some things. I thought I understood some things that I later realized I clearly didn't. And then there's some things I'm probably still struggling to understand. But that's the path. We work with what we have, and we evolve in that way. So this chapter is titled Cutting Ego Fixation, and I'm going to try to hit some of the key points in the first two sections. But the nature of actually every chapter we've read so far is there's a real depth of meaning to almost every line. And when I go through and start underlining parts that I want to emphasize, I end up with so much underlined that I need to go back and really think about, need to practice Hinayana simplicity and to what are the key points. So I've picked out what I believe are some of the key points, but that doesn't mean it's the only thing that's important in the chapter. As with anything in the teachings, what's most important is what's relevant to each one of us and what we understand and what's meaningful to each one of us. In any case, to begin, Trungpa Rinpoche says that in order to realize the meaning and purpose of the Mahayana, it's necessary to review the logic of the Hinayana. And he talks about going back and finding out more about what you've studied. It helps a lot. He says it's like combing your hair, that you don't start with the ends, but you go all the way through from the beginning for your scalp. So going back again and again is very important. Then he says, when you enter the Bodhisattva path, you become a Hinayana person. And when you become a Vajrayana person, you become a more Mahayana person. So I think it's also important to realize that with every one of the yanas, the Hinayana or foundational vehicle, the Mahayana and the Vajrayana, it's at least a two-way street. That there are, each one feeds into the other in some very important ways. One of the things about the inspiration for Mahayana practice is literally the vow that we recite in the chants before we begin sitting. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, I take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, the three jewels. That the inspiration for Mahayana is this desire to develop, to attain enlightenment, to awaken ourselves so that we can be of benefit to other sentient beings. And if we just contemplate that for a moment and think about the historical person of the Buddha, how just one person attaining enlightenment affected the lives of millions and millions of people. So that's what we aspire to. We aspire to attain enlightenment so that we have the skillful means in order to benefit sentient beings, maybe not millions and millions, but whoever we can reach. I want to come back to that part as well about the, you become a more Hinayana person as you follow the Bodhisattva path. But to start with the Hinayana, Trungpa Rinpoche says that the Hinayana path of individual salvation is the ground that prevents you from relating with the wider vision of Mahayana as egotism or as the excessive emotionalism of trying to help everybody. So what he's saying here is that the understanding we develop through Hinayana practice, just first of all, learning through meditation practice, what it means to simply be awake, to be present, to be able to work with things just as they are, and to be able to understand ourselves, open ourselves to ourselves, allows us to approach the Mahayana in such a way that we're not trying to make a statement about ourselves or proclaim anything about ourselves, but just simply be open to situations so that we can work skillfully with other people. The problems that come up when we approach the Mahayana from the point of view of egotism is that too much of our effort to work with people in some way is obscured, confused with whatever need, whatever motivation we might have that's involved with ego. That we need to make someone else feel good so that we feel good. We need to be helpful so that we feel okay about ourselves. And this presents tremendous obstacles. In the same way, where he talks about the excessive emotionalism of trying to help everybody, is talking about sort of what he sometimes called idiot compassion, where we just do things because we think they're helpful, but we're really not paying attention to situations in a way that is actually helpful in the moment, that it's just a policy, you could say. And the Hinayana Foundation gives us the ability to be present in such a way that we're actually able to tune into situations and actually recognize what would really be helpful, where it helps us to tune into a situation in such a way that we're actually open to other people without the filters, expectations, prejudices, whatever we might bring from the point of view of ego. Another way to put it is the one way in which Hinayana is helpful is through the Hinayana, we learn not to do further harm. That in our efforts to, in our relations with people, how we relate to the world, we learn to take care of ourselves and not make a further mess, not cause further harm. I'm just going to leave this as one sentence because I think it's interesting just to contemplate, because he says that through following the sequence of the 5 skandhas and the nidanas, which is the 5 skandhas is the, from Buddhist psychology, what we take to be a self, what we take to be an ego. He says if we actually study that, it becomes absolutely crystal clear that the world is not made by someone else, but it is of your own making. So I think it's an interesting statement just to contemplate. But when we take up the Bodhisattva path, he says we take the attitude of working for others first, which means that you begin to give up your personal struggle to survive and maintain yourself. And beyond that, you can expand further and develop into a ultimately genuine and good person. That the reason you can do this is because you don't put your own situation first, you put others first. So at this point, we're beginning to talk about more of the Mahayana approach to working with ego, which involves actually reversing the entire logic of ego, you could say, of putting oneself first, which he talks about in great length in the next section. But the point is we've already let go of, through the Hinayana, some attachment to ego. We've begun to realize that ego is a fiction, that what we take to be a permanent, ongoing self actually changes from moment to moment, and let alone from day to day, year to year. That as we begin to slow down in meditation practice and actually pay attention to the details of our life, we realize that there's nothing permanent in a sense of self, that the self is constructed and reconstructed moment to moment. So in this sense, he says you've understood that non-theistic discipline is based on working with yourself. But at the same time, you also realize that you need further input and further vision. So in the Mahayana, there's still a quality of individual salvation. We're still working to clarify our confusion. We're still working to clarify our misunderstanding of who we are. And we're still working to uncover our basic goodness, you could say. And as he says, you can't ask for any support, but you can make friends with someone who's done it already. You can rely on the Kalyana Mitra or spiritual friend as an example rather than a savior. So at this point, the teacher, who in the Hinayana is considered something of a preceptor, or in some metaphors, a physician. In the Mahayana, the teacher is more of a spiritual friend. As he says, the job of the spiritual friend is to, he says, my obligation, my vow is that certain experiences in your practice have to be your own discovery. By definition, a spiritual friend is someone who will push you, but will not push you too much. They'll let you experience what is happening. So what this means is the spiritual friend helps us begin to recognize possibilities in ourselves, begins to help us make discoveries about ourselves. And this can come about in any number of ways. It can come about through our study of what but different teachers present to us. It can also come about through how we work with our lives, in the sense that as we work with ourselves in meditation practice and become increasingly open to our experience with less prejudgment, less preoccupation, we're more open to what the world has to teach us, so that literally life experiences can be our spiritual friend if we allow them to be so. And in this sense, this is another way in which in the Mahayana, what we call the post-meditation experience becomes so important, that what we experience in meditation on the cushion begins to pervade our lives and allows us to be open to experience in a way that we get feedback from what happens to us in our lives in a way that helps us open further. I had a class recently where post-meditation, which is how we usually refer to experiences outside of formal meditation practice, was actually translated a little bit differently. It was translated as subsequent attainment, which I thought was kind of interesting. But in any case, what begins to happen is the glimpses of what possibilities we might have that we experience in meditation in the Mahayana become more and more how we experience the world as a whole. And post-meditation experience or subsequent attainment becomes increasingly important. So the next section, Trungpa Rinpoche begins to talk about the nature of ego. He says, as a would-be bodhisattva, you're expected to be an ideal Hinayanist already. Well, I'm still working on that, speaking for myself. But at the same time, you're expected to understand egolessness. But as he says, in order to develop your understanding of egolessness, you have to understand the notion of ego altogether. In the Hinayana, you dissect your ego and divide it into its components. You divide the ego into the 5 skandhas, which just as a quick review, the 5 skandhas are first form, where we just basically take something and say some aspect of our experience and say, this is me or I. Feeling, where having taken some aspect of our experience and said, this is me, by automatically, that means there's a world separate from us. So there's other, and we develop a feeling toward other, a positive, negative, or neutral. Then that gets elaborated further in perceptions and further elaborated in mental concepts. And then finally, in the 5th skandha, an entire realm, an entire world is created. And in the Hinayana, what we do is we look at the process of the 5 skandhas. We look at the different dhatus, the eye consciousness, ear consciousness, mind consciousness, and so on. And we begin to break all this down. And we come to realize when we actually look in our in-the-moment experience that ego is something like a magician's trick, where all kinds of things are put together, all kinds of causes and conditions come together to create an appearance that is actually illusory. And that if we actually look at our experience from moment to moment, we realize that who we think we are, what we think we're doing, how we're relating to the world is changing from moment to moment. That the person that we were when we woke up this morning is different from the person that we were at midday. And the person who we were at midday is different from the person who we are now. Our feelings are different, our perceptions are different, our motivations are different. And that this is changing all the time, moment to moment. And as we look more closely at the skandhas, we come to realize that sometimes we take the skandhas as a self. Sometimes we think we possess the skandhas. Sometimes it's I am angry. That's the skandhas. That's an entire relationship between me and the world. And then sometimes we talk about it as if we possess my anger. So it's changing all the time. And this illusion, this ongoing illusion of ego is what keeps us confused. And worse, once we begin to believe in a solid self, then we begin to react to the world in terms of passion, aggression, and ignorance, the 3 poisons, which in turn creates karma and just keeps the whole thing going. So anyway, Trungpa Rinpoche makes the point that even though we might become proficient in the logic of the 5 skandhas and know the nidanas, which are the how we create karma, that ego could continue to function as usual. And it says that we actually have to work on each skandha step by step. We're also taught that in order, this is again in the Hinayana, we're taught that in order to free our mind of desire, we should reflect on the different parts of the body. So here again, it's taking what seems to be a whole and breaking it down into parts. You reflect on your lover's body, think of it in terms of flesh, bones, mucus, hairs, internal organs. And here again, though, he says, even though this might have worked at one time, in modern times, it's problematic. That just a conceptual understanding alone isn't enough. That this really needs to become personal experience. But really, ultimately, what he says is the question of what ego is all about can only be solved by understanding the Mahayana view of ego. And according to the Mahayana and Buddha Dharma in general, ego is the tendency to hold on to your own survival and defend it against anything that might interrupt it. And he goes on to say egotism in Tibetan is known as dagzin, which means basically holding on to oneself. In different texts, you'll hear this as self-cherishing, ego clinging, but it's all the same thing. He says in the English language, we do not usually use the word egomaniac to refer to ourselves. We use it to refer to somebody who's extremely egocentric. But from the Buddhist point of view, whenever we're holding on to ourselves, we're experiencing egomania. So we're all egomaniacs. We're all holding on to ourselves. And if I could just go back to the beginning of the chapter where he talked about how understanding the Mahayana helps us become a better Hinayanist, I think this is it right here, or at least one place where you can see that right here, that this Mahayana understanding that putting ourselves first, self-clinging, self-cherishing, is the origin of a great deal of suffering, and that by learning to put others first, we actually reverse the logic of ego, which is one of the skillful means of the Mahayana. It's what we literally do when we practice Tonglen. That this is how the Mahayana actually makes us better Hinayanists, because in a very thorough way, it cuts at the root of ego, cuts ego fixation, literally, as the title of the chapter says. So he says ego is kind of a basic crudeness that exists in us. Usually it's the very first thought that arises whenever there's any challenge, any inconvenience or dismay on a smaller or a larger scale. We always think, how am I going to deal with this? We always begin with me. And he says it doesn't have to be large-scale warfare. It could even just be a small inconvenience. But whenever the slightest edge occurs in our life, we think of ourselves first. We think me. And so long as we're thinking me, then we hold all kinds of expectations and demands about the world around us. And this creates disappointment, aggression, frustration of all kinds. Chögyam Mipam Rinpoche calls this the me plan, by the way. And one point that he makes is if the me plan, putting yourself first, was successful, we should all be deliriously happy, but we're not. And the more we acknowledge this, the more we realize this, first on a Hinayana level through understanding the truth of suffering and understanding the truth of the origin of suffering. And then on the Mahayana, whereas he says, it doesn't mean we should stop taking care of ourselves, but the point is to recognize that there is a psychological panic, which starts with this, here, me, minus, and it starts with apprehension, with bewilderment or confusion, and quite possibly leads us to resort to aggression. When worse comes to worse, that's our only choice. Aggression is what we resort to, even in the most sedate situations. We have preconceived ideas of how things should be. And when things don't happen as we expect, we begin to feel doubtful. So he says, so long as we cling to this mentality, as long as we cling to this sense of, cling to ego, you see the idea of compassion as a threat to your personal territory. You think if I follow the Mahayana, will I have enough freedom? If I give up my privacy and surrender my whole being for the benefit of others, it might be like joining the Salvation Army, or worse. You question how far you're willing to go, which is always actually, that's the limit of where we are. That's what we need to think about in terms of our path. But once you become involved in the Mahayana path, you should not be thinking about comfort at all. In the Hinayana, there may be some comfort in the precision of shamatha and vipassana meditation, but in the Mahayana, your own comfort is out of the question. You do not actually have such a thing as privacy or personal comfort, but you're purely dedicated to the welfare of others. So obviously this is a fruitional view of Mahayana. That's what we're directed toward, what we're working toward. Our path is cutting ego fixation. And we do this again by more and more learning that we don't always have to put ourselves first, that we actually can afford to consider other beings. We can actually be open to other beings and work with beings in a compassionate and skillful way. So the next section's on twofold egolessness. So I'll let John take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. So, we're moving into profound territory. To sum up, in the Hinayana, the foundational stage of the path, we have accomplished a number of things, or we're in the process of accomplishing them. Actually, he says that it isn't until you get it to the Mahayana that you become a very, perhaps, accomplished Hinayanist. The Mahayana being the greater stage, Maha, greater, Yana, vehicle or stage. And then when you get to the Vajrayana, the adamantine or indestructible stage, then you become a good Mahayanist. So what we're aiming at the Hinayana level of the path is to really clean up our gross neurosis. And we do this by studying, of course, which convinces us of the truth of the path, and even more by practicing meditation. Meditation not in the sense of trying to achieve some kind of soporific calm, although calm is a part of meditation, but really to the point of bringing our minds into clarity and out of mistakes. The real purpose of the meditation at the Hinayana level of the path is to have us stop constantly engaging in I-other problems, and instead to see the world clearly as it is in the present moment. The two levels of meditation, mindfulness and awareness, shamatha, vipassana. With shamatha, we come back from dream into awareness of this present moment, which is certainly sanity. And we give up the dreams, the thoughts that inhabit our minds, come back to clarity. In giving up those thoughts, we achieve a freedom from suffering, because those thoughts are full of suffering, unhappiness, wishing things were otherwise. That's the very nature of thought. It's constantly thinking about how I can become better, can be happier, can have a better situation in one way or another. And in giving up those thoughts and coming back to simple awareness in the present moment, we achieve a rest, a surcease from suffering. This is one of the main benefits of the Hinayana stage of the path, the foundational stage. The second benefit, as Michael said, is that in doing that, we also cease to do harm. We stop using others as the material, the fodder for our thoughts, our schemes, and instead begin to see the world clearly as it is in the present moment. And the third benefit is that in coming back into the present, we are giving up thoughts of I. I only lives in our dreams, in our thoughts. That's where I takes place. And whenever we come back to a simple, clear awareness of what is going on in the present moment, I is dissolved. It is gone. There's no room for it. And so we begin to experience the absence of I, which is called, in these teachings, egolessness. The absence of ego, egolessness. We do this continually every time we come back into the present. As soon as we're here in this space, their I is silent. There is no voice saying I. And we're just here, clear, aware. So this is the experience, the first experience of egolessness that we begin to have. But there's more to it, because whenever I arises, it always wants something to relate to. It wants a partner, which is the other. The other reaffirms the existence of I. If that's there, if I see that there, then I, a perceiver, am here. So we're constantly in this I-other relationship. Again, when we begin to come back into the present moment, into simple, clear awareness, not only does I dissolve, but so does other. This I-other relationship. When we are in the I-other relationship, it is fraught. It is full of tension. There's always the question, is the other for me, against me, or indifferent, neutral? These are called the three poisons. And they only exist in the world of thought. When we're thinking about me and my relationship to my lover, my enemy, my job, my future, my past, whatever it may be. And we think about, are these others for me, against me, or neutral, indifferent? And so whenever we come present, completely present, that's gone. Those thoughts dissolve, and we're just here in clarity. And so you see that ego is not just about I, it's about this other. And that's why it talks in the teachings about the twofold egolessness. It's the loss of belief in an I, as well as the loss of belief in other. This is the twofold egolessness. Another name for this, which you may have heard, is shunyata, or emptiness, voidness. Empty of what? Empty of I and other. Whenever one is perfectly clearly here, awake, aware in the present moment, I and other are gone. They have dissolved. They only live in the realm of thought, in the realm of our scheming, paranoid, self-aggrandizing, aggressive, possessive thoughts. That's where I and other take place. But when we live here in simple clarity, in the present moment, there is no room for them. They have evaporated into thin air, because that's all they ever were. All they ever were dreams, and the dreams evaporate. And so in the Mahayana teachings, it talks a lot about the twofold egolessness, egolessness of I and egolessness of other. And the word for this, the technical word for this is in Sanskrit is own being, svabhava. And what it means is that we think that I have my own being, but we don't. It's just a fiction. It's just a name. We think that other has its own being, but other is just an arbitrary selecting out. Here we are in this vast panoply of experience, the room, the windows, the trees outside, the air, the objects on your desk, all of this. And we focus on something, we say, look at that, and we make that into an other for a moment. And then it's something else, and then it's something else. But all of these things are just arising in the moment and passing away. A constant and ever-changing display that has no true being. It's just like images in a mirror, like reflections on water, like mirages in the desert. All of these things come and go. And we begin to understand that what we have thought was other is just a constant act of pointing, of selecting out and saying, oh, look at that for a moment. And then it changes. And we're looking at something else. So moment by moment, we create these others and we let them go by selecting that. It's like a figure ground issue, that we're looking at this constantly changing display and we're saying, oh, that's what's important. And we focus on that tree. And suddenly the tree emerges as a figure and everything else is less important, becomes the ground, recedes into the ground for that moment. And then it changes because a squirrel starts coming to us in front of the tree. And we say, oh, look at the squirrel. And now the squirrel is the object of our perception, is the other. Or whatever it may be, we're doing this all the time. This is the constant creation of the twofold egolessness of I and other. It's constant arising and passing away. And when we come back into this simple, clear awareness that we are practicing in the Hinayana at the foundational stage of the path, we begin to dissolve these concretizations, these momentary fixings. And we instead are resting here in this space of awareness in which everything is arising and passing, and we are witnessing it. As Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche said, like old people watching children at play. Or as someone else was it, he who said, like passengers on a train watching the display go by the window, the scenery. So this is the twofold egolessness. Now at the Hinayana level stage of the path, we actually accomplish what's called the 1.5-fold egolessness. What that means is that we get a real understanding of the egolessness of I, that I is just a fiction. I is just a story that we talk about habitually over and over again, but it changes all the time from day to day and year to year, what that story is. Sometimes we're a happy I, sometimes we're an unhappy I. It's changing all the time. And the other side of it is that we begin to understand that other is equally transitory and changing. That is the 1.5-fold egolessness. But it's a bit logical. It's a bit conceptual, especially the part about the other not existing. It's sort of slightly philosophical, you might say, which is why it's not full. It's only 1.5-fold egolessness. We haven't got twofold quite yet because it's a philosophy. We're not experiencing it fully yet. He says, you have realized the egolessness of external phenomena, but not the egolessness of perceiving itself. And what that means is this, that this isn't a philosophy. This isn't a description which we apply again and again and remember. It's an experience. The full experience of the twofold egolessness, the full experience of shunyata, is the experience of reality. This world, real, and in its reality, it is constantly changing and it is constantly vivid. And it's only when we begin to step into that full vividness and constant changingness, and we are giving up this constant attempt to understand something, me, and being in it, that then we begin to understand and live shunyata, the twofold egolessness, the absence of I and the absence of other, the absence of any idea of true being, of concreteness. And instead, what we're living in is a constant and beautiful and vivid changing display, which has no substance that you can grasp. And so he calls this the egolessness of perceiving itself. Even that, there's no perceiver, there's no knower, there is no I who is understanding something spiritual. There is just this, what we're in the middle of now, in all of its vividness. And this is what a teacher's job, an accomplished teacher's job is to communicate that, to help the students see that, so that they can begin to let go of the need to self-aggrandize in any way, including spiritually, especially spiritually, and instead come fully into the world without any self-reference, or less, anyhow. He says, you need to have the experience, in order to realize this, you need to have the experience of dealing with day-to-day life situations in the world. That's where this happens. And in doing that, in coming fully present into the world without any notion of my profundity, my understanding, but instead just being here awake, aware, that's where the inspiration to help others comes from. It's not some do-gooder, goody two-shoes kind of following of an order to help other people and then be your good person. It's because when one becomes completely present in this world without the notion of I and other, the only thing to do is to be there for others, with others, engaged with others. He says this, functioning without ego. He says this produces a greater intelligence, which is called prajna. Jna is the root, Sanskrit root of the word to know. Pra is an intensifier, means like sort of really, really knowing, smart, intelligence, super intelligence. And this comes with this twofold egolessness, because you begin, he says here, to realize the hideousness. Isn't that a great word? Hideousness of believing in yourself and others. You see how habitual patterns, we have these habitual patterns, we think again and again and again, we have these habits, make you thick and stupid. We see the world through the veil of these habitual patterns, and we begin to develop a real revulsion with ego, and we want to come back into this clarity of the present moment. He says there are continual problems with the notion of possession, especially linguistically. Our English language has so much use of the pronoun I, of all pronouns actually. Tibetan uses pronouns much less. It's very interesting. I'm not sure about Sanskrit. I really don't know. I've never studied Sanskrit in any depth. But Tibetan, there's very little use of the pronoun I, although it's there. He says the point of the Mahayana is to overcome that notion of possession, and that things should belong to you first and only afterwards to others. According to the Mahayana, things do not have to belong to you in order for you to enjoy them. It's irrelevant. It's all happening here and now. In our awareness in this present moment, we come back into awareness. This is Vipassana, which contains mindfulness. Mindfulness is coming back from dream. Vipassana is having come back. Now we are here in the present, seeing this panoply as it displays. He says, you begin to realize that obstacles arise from the belief or habit of ego. Then you begin to realize the possibility of overcoming those obstacles and working with them. You realize that you actually possess a state of being that is not centralized in me. You can let go of me and just be here. Each of us, the habit of me is so strong, it comes up again and again and again. But again and again, by remembering our meditation practice, in the deepest sense of the word meditation, of awareness, of coming back to awareness of this world. That's the real meaning of meditation. That by doing this, we can overcome this habit of being me, 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 I. We can let it go. And what a relief it is. What a sack of woe we've been carrying around all these years. Let's see what else he says. He says, You see that there is another side capable of experiencing gentleness and peace versus the anxiety and stress of ego. This gentleness and peace is this world. It's arising gently and in peace all the time. When we let go of our self-centered, egocentric desires and come back to awareness. He says you begin to discover your soft spot, and the soft spot comes from awareness practice, vipassana. That soft spot is that as you come back into this present moment, you feel as though you're melting into it. There's a softness to it, the beauty of this world. He says, by understanding egolessness, you develop genuine sympathy and softness. You begin to feel relaxed and easy. And all it takes is coming back into awake awareness. I mean, it's getting real. It's giving up dream. He says this, you have no idea why or how it happens, but further intelligence and greater possibilities of softness and gentleness are taking place in you. You have no idea how or why it happens. It's just you practice, you study, and this begins to come. It's like suddenly you begin to notice, here it is. Because every time you think, am I getting it? There's the I again. So it kind of sneaks up on you, comes from behind. Suddenly you realize, oh, look at that. It's been happening as you practice more and more. He says, with the understanding of egolessness, which we're having here, and the help of a spiritual friend, that's someone who's already done this, you experience a feeling of great sadness. You feel humbled and sad. Something has been lost. And what's been lost is that constant game of egotism, the constant activity that on the one hand is painful because we're always trying to secure our existence, our well-being. But on the other hand, it's very absorbing. It's like watching a horror movie, you know? It might be painful, but boy, it's gripping. He says, you are losing or have lost ego charisma gained in ordinary life, which was based on conquering territory, one kind or another. And then what that means is, we're all very ambitious. We want to be loved. We want to be admired. We want to be wealthy. We want to, whatever it is, all these things that we would like to have to bolster our sense of well-being. And so there's a sadness as we begin to realize that by coming into the present moment, we're giving up that game, the game of self-aggrandizement. And we're giving up those reference points of who I am. I am this person who has this talent and this fault which I'm trying to overcome, and that whatever it might be, the way we define ourselves. And we're giving that game up. And that's been an old friend, that game. Painful, but always there, coming back to it. He says, losing that charisma that we've gotten about me, I'm a great, whatever it might be, produces depression and a feeling of loss. You might begin to panic, thinking, now what? Where am I? What am I? Where am I going? What am I supposed to be doing? Because we're giving up those old reference points of who and what we thought we were. He says, when you begin not to exist anymore, and this is such a happy thing that Buddhism offers us, right? We begin not to exist anymore. When that happens, you are halfway through. And when you realize that, there is a yearning for the egolessness of dharmas. There is a yearning to go beyond struggle, the struggle to secure myself. make myself safe, to go beyond hunger, thirst, duty, and the idea that some kind of relief or letting go will take place. We all have this idea that we're going to just get to this place where we can just go, thank goodness. What a relief it is to let go of that. You realize that individual salvation you have experienced so far has become tenuous, and you have developed greater sympathy for other people. And the world has been changing. The world is becoming soft, luminous, tender. And in that soft and luminous world, when we begin to connect to it, there is nothing left to do but be kind to others. It's the only thing left. So it's not like the Bodhisattva is being good to other people because he wants to be virtuous, he, she. It's because it's choiceless. It's the only way to be. It's the only thing that makes sense. He says, you begin to feel that you're not professional at anything. We have these things we're professional at. I'm a good this, and people admire me for it. I'm a good tennis player. I'm a good Dharma teacher. I'm a good, whatever it might be, writer, actor, director, producer. I'm a great lawyer. Who knows what it might be. And we carry this around like a badge. And we begin to let go of that. He says, when you begin to lose the ego of self and the ego of phenomena, you start to feel that you're not professional at anything, not a pro-con man, and don't need to sell yourself. You take the Bodhisattva vow. That's the vow to put others before you first, because you have a yearning to go beyond such salesmanship and charisma. Yeah. So finally, we got this section, renunciation and faith. He says, having understood the egolessness of dharmas, that means the egolessness of other, the fact that others don't exist either. They're just a constant and ever-changing display. And the view that there is nothing to hang on to, nothing to work on, nothing to grasp, you begin to understand the notion of simultaneous openness and fullness. That openness and fullness is the experience of shunyata, of the real world that we begin to step into. And it's just this, vivid, full, moving, constantly changing. You're going beyond the business deal mentality and getting a return on investment. You're going beyond that. You have trust in something without expecting anything in return. And what the trust is in this world as it arises and passes now, in all its beauty. And there is a quality of loneliness. You feel alone and lonely, not knowing whether you are giving or whether you are gaining. Alone and lonely. There's this feeling of nothing to relate to. No one telling you, now you're doing a good job. He says that in order to develop true faith, this word faith is used in a very different way than it's used in theistic disciplines. Faith is not a matter of believing in something. It's a matter of being in something. And he says, in order to do this, you have to become less aggressive, less demanding, and less involved in justifying your ego fixation. You need to be renouncing the notion that you are going to get something out of following the path of Dharma, giving up that kind of aggression, getting something. And yet the irony of it is that we do get something, only it's nothing you can hold on to. Faith comes without the idea of getting anything in return, and this is emptiness. And you begin to develop sympathy because you do not have to buy or sell anything. He says, you need to be able to see yourself on your own mental screen in order to know how far you have gotten with ego and egolessness. You just see yourself accurately, how you're behaving. You need shamatha and vipassana to do that. This is the way to mix your mind with the Dharma completely. So I think I'll stop there. Really what we're getting into, you see the hallmark of the Mahayana stage of the path, is the entrance into the twofold egolessness, aka shunyata. And in fact, the very entry into the Mahayana path, the very first stage of the 10, there are 10 stages, 10 bhumis, which we'll be coming to. The first one is called Great Joy, pramudita in Sanskrit. The great joy is the discovery of the twofold egolessness, the discovery that it is not a matter of philosophy, that this world is constantly arising without any fixed self, without any fixed other. It's just a constant, vivid, tender, luminous display in which we can participate. So we could have a discussion. Shinyi.
Hi, thank you, John. I want to ask, what is it exactly about Mahayana that allows for the full experience of twofold egolessness as opposed to 1.5-fold in Hinayana? I know in the chapter, like you talk about, and also Trungpa Rinpoche wrote about, like the remaining 0.5-fold left undone by Hinayanas being the perceiver of phenomena, but I just wonder, like, what is the logic in Mahayana, or what is it special about Mahayana that casts that perceiver aspect of the phenomena? Yeah.
It's a number of things. One is that it's the natural evolution of your practice, coming more and more and more into awareness, and the realization that I obscures awareness, the I, the doer, that self, and that you can give that up and come more and more into awareness. That's part of it, and also buttressed by the study, listening to these ideas, which reinforces your experience. See, that's what words are for. They're sort of to lead you towards new experiences and to confirm those experiences when you begin to have them. Another thing, though, is the relationship with a spiritual friend, where you can find it. Because the spiritual friend should be a person who has experienced this and can communicate it just by their being to you. Then that helps a lot. So those two aspects. It's just a matter of persistence on the part of each practitioner, each one of us.
Thank you.
Jane.
I'm really struggling with this idea of something very minor and everyday and mundane that doesn't involve any other people, but it involves, let's say, an institution or a corporation, and they're treating you unfairly or committing an injustice, against you. And it speaks very deeply to your sense of right and wrong. So you feel you've been wronged, but not by a person. And there's not really ego involved. It's more of a sense of right and wrong. Someone asks for your private information, and if you don't give it to them, you lose what you've already paid for. It's not, the bargain's off. So does one just let go of that? Or the sense of an injustice, is that ego, or is that something worth investing some time or effort in? I could be very concrete if I'm being too vague.
I think there are two things in play here. Michael, you might want to contribute to this too. One is my sense of being wronged.
Okay.
And the other is the fact that this other, an organization, a person, whatever it might be, is committing a crime, is committing a violence.
Right.
And you can address that crime and that violence as best you can. But you don't need the sense of being personally wronged. You can, in other words, there is skillful action that the bodhisattva, the Buddhist practitioner, constantly should be engaging in. Skillful action is bringing things into sanity and clarity and right, and protecting people so that they can live wholesome lives.
Okay, that makes tremendous sense. Thank you.
Michael, do you have anything to add to that?
Partly, yeah, but partly it's an answer also to Ni's question as well, that there are practices in the Mahayana, such as the paramitas and the Lojong slogans that we'll get to later in the book, that are all about developing skillful means and ways of working with situations that are hopefully more beneficial to everyone. But I think, there are a lot of ways to create twofold ego. It doesn't have to be another person. It can be a thing. And in my experience, most of the time when I relate to situations from the point of view of twofold ego, it's not particularly helpful and tends to make things worse.
Yeah.
That you can address things without personal, the same kind of personal investment, I guess. That's what you were saying, I think.
Okay, thank you. No, this is very helpful. So it's the personal investment in that is where you get your ego involved.
And it's also the sense in the Mahayana that everything we experience is an opportunity to practice what we've been learning. So that we don't have to just react. I'm not saying you in particular, it's true for me, it's true for all of us, I would imagine, that we tend to react in fairly habitual ways most of the time. But then we start waking up when we realize there are other possibilities.
Mm-hmm. I guess that gives me quite a bit to think about. I like this idea of skillful means.
Definitely.
For that. What?
Yes, there are three main qualities that develop in the Mahayana. As the Bodhisattva comes into the understanding of emptiness, shunyata, the lack of the twofold ego, there are three main qualities that develop.
Okay.
The first is clarity, which we've already talked about a bit, prajna. It's seeing things with complete clarity, devoid of preconception, devoid of judgment, clearly as they are. Ta, they say in Sanskrit, as it is. The second thing that the Bodhisattva develops that goes along with that, it's like the flip side of that coin, is compassion. And compassion, as Trungpa Rinpoche said over and over again, is not a feeling sorry for. That's they call grandmother's love. Not to slur any grandmothers in the group. But it's not a feeling sorry for. What is an open-heartedness? It's a tenderness. It's a love for the world and for others. A huge heart. In fact, the word in Tibetan for compassion that's translated with the English word compassion is ningje, which means noble heart. Noble heart. And then the third quality, which is actually the hardest of the three to develop. The first two start as soon as the person starts to see emptiness, shunyata. The prajna and compassion are developing automatically. But the third one doesn't come until about 2/3 of the way through to enlightenment itself, 2/3 of the way through the Mahayana path. And that's what's called skillful means, upaya. And that means that the bodhisattva is able to give up the self-consciousness of thinking, I'm developing prajna and compassion. I'm a bodhisattva. Because that kind of self-consciousness impedes your ability to act skillfully and involvement with others. And so then begins the third quality, which is really beginning to approach being a Buddha, of being able to act skillfully to help other people come into sanity, come into awakening. Upaya in Sanskrit. So these are the three main qualities of the Mahayana path that we're about to study.
Thank you. I look forward to understanding a little bit more because this is something, I mean, historically that I experience this sense of an injustice. And it doesn't involve another person or something that's been done to me. It's almost like a violation. I have to deal with it.
Art.
Yeah. It's hard to be compassionate toward a corporation that's taking advantage of you and interfering with your privacy for their gain. And it's not even a sense that they're taking something away from me, but they're just acting out of being self-serving. It's hard to have compassion for.
Compassion may be inappropriate in that instance.
Right, right. It's not even anger. It's just a sense of, and maybe there's a little bit of, what action do I take? Maybe that's this skillful means that can contribute to making a better world, because the world as it exists is full of these injustices.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Meg.
Well, I'm just responding to what Jane is saying. I guess I was on hold talking to somebody the other day, a corporation. I was on hold for 15 or 20 minutes and then the phone gets disconnected and it's just so infuriating. And there's no one to be mad at. You got to call back and what are you going to yell at the person who answers because it's someone different? And so really when you strip it down, I find that it's just ego. So I feel like I've been, somebody has wasted my time and my time is so precious. And I do feel, I don't know if that's true for you, Jane, but for me, when I strip things away, I find that ego is at the base of it a lot of times.
No, I think that's correct. I mean, there's definitely, ego is part of it, but I don't think it's the whole thing. That's what I have to unpack.
Anybody else?
Robert?
Yes. I almost get the sense that once you can get devoid of it and it doesn't hit the emotional level, that you can then make that right choice. when you're emotional about any issue, I mean, even when people talk about getting a lawyer, the best part about that is they're not emotionally invested in a situation. So that from a Buddhist perspective, if you weren't emotionally invested, then the right action would be much easier to make, because you would have that level of clarity, or at least be taking steps toward it. Although I do lack understanding in a Buddhist path.
Thank you. Yeah, emotions definitely cloud our judgment.
I've had that experience and challenged myself with my own path. I've gone to diets where I haven't eaten or drank for weeks almost, and the emotions creep in and make it cloudier. So that's something that is a personal challenge for me.
In itself, emotion is just energy. The problem is we let the energy ride us instead of being able to ride the energy.
Simple and profound answer. It makes sense.
Well, it's easier said than done in my experience, but still it's true.
Plus, the emotions contain two elements. There's the energetic aspect of the emotion, the energy of attraction or repulsion or whatever it might be. And then there's the story that we tell that kindles that energetic feeling. And the story is one of the big problems. So at the Mahayana level of the path, we will get to this at some point. We start working with the emotions as part of our meditation practice. And the first thing you would do is to strip away the story and just feel it.
Wow.
The story. That person shouldn't have said that to me. Who do they think they are? Whatever it might be. That corporation, they're heartless. And we have this whole story that we and then it arouses this emotion.
The storyline is twofold ego.
Yeah. Thank you.
Here's me, here's that, here's how I'm going to relate to it.
Yeah.
That's twofold ego.
Indeed.
Wow, that's a lot clearer, because that's exactly what happens to me, and it clouds my insight and everything else. So this is very helpful. Thank you.
Mark.
Hi, how are you? I came kind of late. I missed a lot of it. I'm sorry, but I was just I was thinking of something that you said a long time ago about reversing positions with another person, and how doing that, taking ownership of a problem and trying to be like apologetic, although you felt you were the wronged party. And recently I had a situation with CVS where I was like 45 minutes on the phone. And I know this is just a story. I don't even know if it's even relatable, but I was just so angry and dealing with my medications and dealing with CVS, which seems to be cutting back on staff. And I'm waiting and waiting. And finally I get through to a woman. And then I just start, instead of doing what I would normally do and getting crazy, I just immediately started thinking, like, when I was a nurse and when I was, when I was working as a nurse. And I went to her and I just reached out and I said, you must be having a really tough time there. It's really, this is a pharmacy. They can't make mistakes. And they are overwhelmed. And in taking that position, we ended up talking, and it was really nice making connection with a person and trying to put myself in their shoes and them being so appreciative of it. And it immediately reduced my stress. And I felt better. So maybe I got a payoff anyway. But anyway, that's basically it.
That's terrific.
Does that relate?
It reminds me of an old slogan. Before you get angry at somebody, walk a mile in their shoes.
Yeah.
And then if you still can't come to a resolution, you're a mile away and you've got their shoes. Yeah, I forget who told me that one.
That's very funny.
What you just described, though, is right out of the Lojong slogans that Michael was talking about, that we're going to be coming to. And Maitri and metta practice, and yeah.
Mhm.
Christy Gonzalo, you had your hand up. Is she here?
Thanks, John. Yes, I'm here.
There you are.
I just have a question about, I guess, some of the terminology that I'm encountering when we talk about the quality of mind that a bodhisattva has, like this kind of steadiness and enthusiasm at the same time.
And what?
And enthusiasm.
Oh, enthusiasm, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a steadiness and enthusiasm that are kind of balanced. But then we talk so much about passion and as kind of a negative thing in Buddhism in general, and that we're trying to extinguish that. And then I hear the word enthusiasm come up a lot in the Mahayana. And I guess it's just an important question because I struggle with this kind of extinguishing of passion, you know, and sort of a thawing out of the passion. So I guess the question is really about like this idea of passion, but then maintaining a certain amount of enthusiasm in the Mahayana. And so I wonder if there's anybody could just shed some light on helping me understand those terms better, maybe the difference or how we can keep enthusiasm in the Mahayana and steady it. And is that passion? So I don't know if anybody has any.
Michael, you look like you're.
I'm thinking about it. I guess, well, okay. I guess in some ways, I think it's a good question. And I think you're getting at some of the difference even between the Hinayana and Mahayana, that a lot of the Hinayana is just coming to understand how it is that we're, how the kleshas, passion, aggression, and ignorance, perpetuate confusion, perpetuate karma, the creation of karma, I should say, and that the Mahayana does take a somewhat different approach. It's not the grasping, clinging quality of passion is a problem. But in itself, it's similar to the question about emotions just a little while ago. When it's just energy, it can actually be worked with in a positive way. But it's the grasping, the clinging, the self-referential quality, the desire to hold on, the denial or the ignorance of impermanence that's involved in passion. All of that just creates more confusion. But when passion expresses itself perhaps as appreciation and enjoyment, so long as there isn't the grasping and clinging quality, then it's, maybe it's not exactly the same thing, I guess. Certainly in the Mahayana, aggression is, is the greater klesha. That's the one that's, the most damaging from the point of view of Mahayana, because it's so contrary to the idea of working for the benefit of others, and so, so much involving solidifying, me against someone else. And passion, I think, again, when it manifests as clinging, grasping, then it's, and it's as a klesha, it's a problem. But at its heart, it's energy, and if we can work with that in a non-ego way, it's very powerful because of its quality of engagement, its quality of appreciation, its quality of enjoyment. So it is seen somewhat differently in the Mahayana, although certainly, again, the clinging, grasping, self-referential, ego-driven quality, that is a problem. That's something we have to work with and understand and recognize and let go. But to the extent that we are able to just rest in present awareness, begin to experience something else. So it's the Sukadagarbha, the joy that we talked about before. And that's really the heart of the steadfastness and the, what was the other word that you used? Enthusiasm. Yes, enthusiasm. Because, again, it's just energy that we can work with. And it becomes even more true in the Vajrayana, by the way, which is, I think, maybe why Trungpa Rinpoche says a good Vajrayana becomes a more ideal Mahayana, because Vajrayana is very much about recognizing the wisdom in every situation, the wisdom possibilities in every situation.
Thank you, Michael. That distinction really helps me. So I can maintain a sense of joy, and as long as it just moves through and there's not a component of grasping.
Clinging, yes.
Clinging, right. Okay. Thank you so much.
Fred, you've had your hand up.
Yeah. Hey, John. This has been a very enlightening talk. It's, I'm going to come back and listen to this again. But I got a question on, that last 0.5 of egolessness about, there's this song. I don't know if you ever heard of it. I think it's either a Van Morrison or a Morrissey song. But they ask like a Zen koan question in there. It's like, what's the sound of one hand clapping? And the question is that like that the mind constantly realize, like it has like a ability to see when it's dreaming and it's drifting off into space, and it's like ability to like wake itself up over and over again.
And?
No, the question is, does that that Zen koan, what's the sound of one hand clapping refer to that last 0.5% of, or that, sorry, the last 0.5 of egolessness?
The Zen koans come from the Rinzai tradition, and what they're, one of the main functions is to confound logical mind and bring the person into a breakthrough into prajna, you might say, because logical mind is not prajna. But I've never done work with koans. It's in a different tradition. So I don't think I can answer this question adequately. That's the classic Zen koan that everybody talks about. What is the sound of one hand clapping?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and for some reason, the talk brought that up. It was like, whoa.
Yeah, I don't know why, but the practice is that the monk sits contemplating that, trying to answer it until their mind stops. And so I think we're going to have to move on from that one.
Yeah, well, I got a follow-up from that. It's like, is it like, like that stopping? Is it like an abruptness that it's an awakening? Like that,
yes.
That's the experience. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Philip had a question.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for your teaching. So this gets back to the pure emotion, the pure energy of emotion. Does that belong in the second half of twofold egolessness?
Oh, yes.
So when we're taught, feel the feeling, where do you feel it in your body? Ultimately, the discovery is that it's not there.
No, it's there.
It is there.
Yeah.
Does it exist?
Well, depends on what you mean by exist.
Of course, yeah.
I mean, in the idea of shunyata, they say that nothing has any true existence, but they're defining existence in a very particular way as having three qualities. In order for a thing to have a true existence, it has to be one thing. And according to Buddhism, there are no one things. Everything is a part of a matrix of interdependence. That it has to be independent. And again, it's not, it's dependent. But the third quality is it has to exist in time. And what the teachings teach us is that nothing endures in time. These words, as soon as they appear, they're already dying. This gesture, as it appears on your computer screen, it's already leaving. Nothing has any true existence for any duration of time. It's just a constant appearing and disappearing. And so they say that nothing exists in those ways. Now that's the way the Buddhists define existence, and then then deny it. We'll be getting to this when we get deeper into the doctrine of Shunyata, and we're going to be looking at the Heart Sutra and Prajnaparamita teachings, and also Madhyamaka, the Madhyamaka teachings at some point. And these are teachings all about getting really down into emptiness.
Thank you.
Judith. This will be the last, I think.
Yeah, getting late.
Judith? You had your hand raised? No?
Hi. I wanted to reply to Philip about the transformation. It's more a transformation. If you have a certain feeling and you, or emotion, let's say anger, and you see where you feel it in your body, and you just stay with it, it transforms. So in that way, it has no true existence.
That's helpful too. Thank you, Judith.
Sure.
Well, friends, tomorrow night we're going to have discussion again. You're all invited. It's been a lot of fun, these Wednesday night discussions. It'll be right after meditation, just as this class was after meditation. And if anyone here wants to discuss their practice with me, Laura, or Michael, you're invited, because there's hardly anything more important than your practice or your understanding, whatever you like. So if there's nothing more, anybody have anything urgent or compelling, then we'll close with the dedication of merit, which is such a Mahayana Bodhisattva thing to do, right? Giving away the merit gained to the benefit of all sentient beings. Okay. Who's here who would like to lead this chant? Is Meg? Or, yeah? If I put it up on the screen?
Sure. Yeah. We will close by dedicating the merit earned by our practice for the benefit of all sentient beings. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat
The enemy wrongdoing from the stormy wave.
Waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Good night, everybody. Wonderful to see you all.
Thanks,
Thank you,
John.
everyone.
Thank
you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
John. Thanks,
Thank you.
John. Thanks,
Tomorrow.
Michael. Thank you,
Maybe-
everyone.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you.